So last book I read was Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg. Just finished reading it, and it's actually I've got a physical copy, which isn't something I normally do. I pretty much read everything on Kindle, and although I have this on copy, I also read it on Kindle. So the only reason I brought it is so I could show it on camera. But the book concerns four university aged um, men, boys, men. I think they're in their first year of university or college, and one of them studies ancient languages, and he manages to translate this script in the university library that points them to a temple somewhere where if they can pass the test there, they they get access to eternal life. But the caveat to it is that if four of them must enter, and only two of them will survive. So one of them has to kill themselves, and the other one has to be killed by the remaining two. So it's a group of then four roommates who go and try to get the secret to eternal life. It's written by Robert Silverberg. He was a pretty prolific science fiction author. I've only read Dying Inside of his, but he's a phenomenally good writer. It's so impressive reading what he can write, and really the book. I guess you could call it science fiction. It's probably closer to fantasy, but I don't really think it's either of those things. I think at its core, it's a character study of these four friends who are all in their own rights a distinct set of individuals, and it's I just thought it was so interesting. It was so funny. It was so well written. Definitely a 5-star book for me. I think it wasn't flawless. It wasn't perfect, but just so interesting to read. I couldn't really. It wasn't like a page turner. It wasn't like really thrilling, but it was just so enjoyable to read that I just found myself always, if I had a spare bit of time, I would read it. It sounds like it's going to be quite plot heavy. It's not really. The first maybe, I don't know, 70% of the book probably is just about them traveling, stopping off at places, and just kind of getting to know the characters and their interactions. And obviously, because of the way the plot is driven, these boys, if they do have to go through this trial, and if they do have to do these things, who's the leader, who's the power, where are the power dynamics in this group of four people, who's weak, who it's just a really interesting way of looking at, or I guess a really interesting plot device to allow the exploration of these four people's relationship. It's clearly written in a different time. So one of the things, one of the criticisms I've seen, or that I do try and avoid reading reviews before I make these videos. These videos are kind of more almost a sort of a memoir. Do I mean memoir? Uh, just like a data bank for myself, so I can look at sort of when I've read a book, what my initial thoughts are on it. And actually, I think that's quite important for especially the science fiction genre, because a lot of these books you finish and you think, that was a good book, and then some really kind of stick with you and resonate, and it's only a few months even later that you realize, like, this book was actually amazing and had quite a deep impact on how I think about the world. Totally forgot what I was saying. um, yeah, one of the criticisms is that the depiction of women isn't they're like the women in the book are very one dimensional, not very well drawn out, um, just lack a huge amount of depth, and that is true. But I think it's a bit of an unfair criticism because the whole point of this book is seeing it through the eyes of these four characters, who each character is one of the first person narratives as well. So you really get in the head of each character. It kind of tells sort of you see one character's point of view, next chapter will be a different one, etc., etc., and it just cycles between those four. And so because you're seeing it through these kind of young, new adult males, they do have, you know, not particularly great, they're not particularly mature views, and so that's kind of what's been portrayed through the book. So I think to say, this is a yeah, I think the depiction or having kind of limited characterizations of the females in the book is deliberate, and if anything, just adds to how well Robert Silverberg develops these characters and how well it's explained. But overall, would I recommend it? Absolutely. I think it's I think it's a phenomenally good book. Even just for the writing, just for the prose. Even if nothing really happened, I would still have thoroughly enjoyed this. I did with Dying Inside as well. I would say this is a little bit better than Dying Inside. Um, but yeah, it's not a particularly plot driven book, and it's not the premise. The I guess the setup. If I did an even reasonable job at at putting that at conveying that, I think that's it's quite compelling. I think a lot of people would want to read based on that setup because you'd want to know what happened at the end. I don't think that carries it by the end. I won't obviously spoil the ending, but it fell a bit flat for me, and I don't think the conclusion was that narratively satisfying. Um, Although it does, it does have a conclusion. It doesn't kind of leave things up in the air too much. There's one point that isn't explained, but mostly it it's a satisfying narrative. It's just not very good. um, but I wouldn't say that should put you off with the book. I still think it's one of my favorite books. I think, and I think in spite of having a pretty lackluster ending because of what the book's really about. The book's really about these dynamics, these group of these four men, young men, who who are all kind of trying to learn how to proceed in the world and how to proceed in their ongoing relationship with each other. It's really interesting, really well written. Would definitely recommend.